First of all, a huge thank you to Ruby and Christabel for having set this up. I've only just met them this afternoon, and I'm astonished that, I don't know what age you folks are, but you're a lot younger than I am, and I'm just astonished at the depth of the spiritual thinking and feeling you're sharing in the car just now, and the way you're putting that into action here in terms of making a community and bringing together people with these kind of concerns. I am a Quaker by choice, or convincement, as we say, and in Quakerism we talk about working under concern. And concern means something that comes up in you that you feel you need to do something about with your life as service, your life perhaps as leadership in that service, servant leadership. And that guided by what? If we are going to engage in the world, if we are going to be an activist, if we are going to be active, if we are going to respond to life, which is to say to take responsibility, that's the meaning of the word, then where does it come from? Are we just material beings? Material girls and boys, here today, gone tomorrow, egos walking about on legs of meat, with no deeper meaning. No deeper meaning to our lives than what we can get out of it, from what pleasure we can extract from it. Or is there such a thing as meaning? And if so, what is it that gives meaning to the meaning of meaning? What lies behind meaning? A lot of you here will be students or scholars, and you'll know that in the contemporary academy, the contemporary university, to talk about meaning and to talk in particular about anything essential is a very unpopular thing to do. It's not what you do in the postmodern academy. But if we are looking beyond reason alone, if we're looking beyond cold logic, if we're looking beyond materiality, we have to ask, or we are invited to ask, do our lives have meaning? Is our activism going to be guided by anything other than abstract principles that you might package up as human rights or something of that nature? But even then, you've got to dig behind and say, well, what gives meaning to those rights? Where is it coming from? Is there a meta behind the physical? Or is it all just physical? In which case a competitive world makes sense. Because we might as well engage in the 3 F's of survival: feeding, fighting, and reproduction, while we can get away with it, because there isn't anything else. But what if there is meaning? What if there is an essence? Oh, thanks so much. Thank you. What if we are beings endowed not just with bodies and with rational faculties, but also with hearts, with souls? What if the feelings that we have a grounding that are beyond transitory importance? which means that the activism in which we engage ourselves speaks to the deepest heart of what life is about, and that life is life as love made manifest. What if love is for real? What if love is for real? Forever and a day. What if, as John of the Cross, the Spanish poet we were talking about in the car, puts it, the fullness of our life is dying into love. And so we never die, because there is only the life of love beyond the outward surface of appearances. And this is where, as Adrienne Rich, an American poet that some of you will be familiar with, in her collection Dream of a Common Language, the dream of a common language, says, "My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, we're working here on the long wave of life. Violence operates in the short wave of life, the attempt at the quick fix. Non-violence operates on the long wave, intergenerationally. Age after age, perversely, because in the eyes of the world, to give yourself to the works of love, to give yourself to what Martin Luther King called the beloved community, is a perverse action. Because what's in it for you? What's in it for me? It's not about what's in it for you or me at that level. This is not about the me, it's not even about the we. This is about the deep holding of the life of all of reality. This is where our activism, at the deepest level, can, if we want to open ourselves to it, come from. Who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power. You see, if we care about the things worth caring for, we will very often feel very powerless. Many of you here will have been involved in campaigns, I'm quite sure, that have ended in bitter disappointment and loss. That is often the activist's lot. No extraordinary power, but on that long wave of life, we reconstitute the world. We are about resurrection. We are about regeneration, about reconstituting the world. If we don't have that, our activism will dry up. Look around this room. This room is filled with predominantly, pretty entirely, I would say, young and beautiful people. That's the reality. There's a lot of giftedness in this, a lot of blessedness in what many of you have been given in your lives. But if you just take that and you use it only for number one, it's going to run out. It's going to dry up. The oil in the lamp of your youth will dry up. And then what happens? Well, look what happens to many people when they become middle-aged. They realize they're going to have to get more supply from somewhere. So they start doing what? So many activists burn out or sell out. If you don't replenish that which gives life, you start to burn out or sell out. And it's a horrible thing to see happen, but it happens all around us. And I put it to you, that is why spiritual activism is so imperative. It is so imperative to ask yourself, especially at the age that many of you are at now. That's the age when I started doing it, when I was in my late teens and early 20s. Going on a deep journey within myself, asking, is there such a thing as spiritual reality? Do I have grounds for believing that there is a meta behind the physical? And as you explore that question, as you undertake what Gandhi called experiments with truth, you deepen into that journey of who you are. I know many of you here are using spiritual practices such as meditation and yoga. That is what these things are about. Coming along in the car, we were talking about Juan Mascaro's beautiful translation and commentary of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, published by Penguin Classics. And his translation of the opening line of the Gita is this, and it's deeply relevant to spiritual activism. On the field of truth, and the word he's translating as truth is, of course, Dharma. On the field of truth and the field of Dharma, on the battlefield of life, what came to pass, Sanjaya? Let's take that in reverse. What came to pass? What's happening in the present moment? What's happening in this moment? Breathe. Look around. All these souls in this room. This beautiful building. What came to pass, Sanjaya? Where are we now? On the battlefield of life. Think of your wider life. The struggles you're engaged with. I bet there's not a single person in this room who's having an easy life. Shit happens. As we say in Glasgow, what matters is how you shovel it. On the battlefield of life, what came to pass on the battlefield of life, on the field of truth, in the cosmic dharmic process of the unfolding of reality? You see how in Mascaro's translation you've got this nested sense of reality. On the field of truth, in the huge cosmic arena, on the battlefield of life, what came to pass? Sanjaya. So who was Sanjaya? Usually in these spiritual epics where the it's from the Mahabharata in Indian mythology, like the Gita is, or whether it's Bible stories in the Christian tradition, or whatever. Usually the names mean something. Sanjaya was the eagle-eyed charioteer of the blind king Dhritarashtra. Because, you see, political power is blind. If you go down the route where you might risk burning out or selling out, you are likely to become blind to inner life, which is to say spiritual realities. And that's where political process, policy process, the work we do in the world out there needs the eagle-eyed vision of Sanjaya. And I put it to you that our task as spiritual activists is to try and overcome that dichotomy. To walk with one foot, the shamanic function, walking with one foot in this world of keeping your act together, taking care of your family, your career, all of that kind of stuff, which is one part of our lives, and the other foot in utter wildness. The other foot in that realm of the spirit where, as Christian tradition has it, the spirit for which metaphors of wind, running water, or fire are used in the Gospels, cannot be bidden, because the wind blows where it will, the fire will run where it will, the waters will roll down like a mighty river of righteousness, of justice, as the prophet Amos in the Hebrew tradition put it. One foot in each of these worlds, with no extraordinary power, reconstitutes the world. Now, Christabel and Ruby asked me about a year ago to come and speak to you. And it's the best part of a day's travel down from where I live. And I said, well, can we leave it? And next time I'm down that way, maybe we can do something. So I got in touch with you, and I forget how it happened, but basically, I'm down here just now because tomorrow I'm going through to Shrivenham near Swindon to speak on the Advanced Command and Staff course of the Joint Services Command and Staff College of the UK Defence Academy. For the past 20 years, this will be the 20th anniversary, I've given an annual guest lecture on that course, which is to some 300 or 400 senior military officers being groomed for higher command. And I speak specifically on non-violence, on putting the case for non-violence. And so for 20 years now, I've had the privilege of speaking on various courses in the UK Defence Academy and also in other European colleges of war, and engaging with people who have witnessed or sometimes undertaken terrible things in their lives, who have seen the pits of what it can mean to be human beings, where we lose our humanity and become dehumanized. And in 2009, I had just come back from giving one of these talks in Geneva on NATO's Partnership for Peace programme to diplomats and senior military. And my head was filled with the kind of stories that you hear from serving soldiers in the officers' mess late at night. I was wrestling with the awfulness of our times at a time when the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was still going strong. Libya had not yet taken off with all its consequences and refugees coming across the Mediterranean and so on. And I was aware that I needed to sort out my thinking and feeling a bit more deeply on that kind of work that I was doing. And over a period of several years, I felt a growing pull within me to make a pilgrimage, to return to the island on which I was raised in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, an island known as Lewis in the north and Harris in the south. You get two for the price of one. And I just felt a need to walk the island, to walk the wild parts of the island and see what would open up. And I'd just like to share a bit with you about what that was like. It was only 60 miles as the crow flies, but I knew the territory enough to know it was the most treacherous territory you could be walking over. Mountain passes, deep suppurating bogs, lonely moors, before getting into the villages of familiar people in the northwest of Lewis. And I set off on the walk. The first couple of days were through villages in Harris. I had three foci on my walk. I wanted to visit healing or holy wells that were in some of the villages. I wanted to visit the ruins of the pre-Reformation so-called temples or champel in the Gaelic. These old churches beside the sea, fallen to abandonment since the Reformation 500 years ago. And the beehive shealing sites, where village people would come and stay with their cattle in the summer, these domed, stone-built buildings, dry stone buildings. And many of them have names that suggest sacred connotations. The shealing of the priest, or Bridget's shealing, or other things that suggest that they were used for spiritual purposes. And I set out walking into a landscape that in some ways I knew well, but never before had I gone with such intent. 12 days walking deeper and deeper into the land with my camping gear, what food I could carry, otherwise foraging food like mussels or wild sorrel along my way. And as you walk into nature like that, there's a saying that civilization is only 5 days deep. Because you start to lose the veneer of civilization within yourself. You have to move across that landscape in a way that fits with the place. Otherwise, you'd so easily break a leg or find yourself wallowing in a deep, quaking bog, as nearly happened to me on various occasions. And as I was walking about this, and laterally over 7 years writing about it, because the experience grew deeper and deeper in the writing, I came to realize that I had been walking not only into ecology, but also into the imagination. The highest mountain on the island is called Cleasham, means a craggy place. On it there's this place called the Slope of the Fallen Stones, where from the glacial era there are rocks the size of lorry cabs resting there. And as I was walking along the side of Cleasham, I had running through my mind one of the legends of the place. That long ago, two men were coming back from Stornoway late one night, each with a barrel of whiskey over his shoulders, and as they got to the craggy place, they saw that the door was open in the hill. The Shean, the fairy hill door, was open, and the Shea, the people of peace, the fairy people, were deep inside the mountain, and you could hear the skirling of their pipes and their fiddles. And the first man said, "I'm off to join the Cayley," and he went straight in through the open door and joins the fairy folks in their dancing. The second man, he's done a bit of studying of spiritual activism. He's a wee bit more careful. He takes a plaid from his mantle, pulls out the pin that keeps it clasped, and he presses the iron pin into the door of the fairy hill, because iron contains the power of the other world. And in he goes, and he dances all night, and when dawn comes, he says to his friend, "Come on, it's time we went away home now before they shut the door." And his friend said, "No, just one more reel, just one more reel." And eventually he has to leave his friend, still got the barrel of whiskey on his shoulder. He has to leave his friend and goes back out and withdraws his pin, heads off home. So the first man is missing for a whole year. This story, by the way, is localized in various parts of Scotland and probably beyond. I'm telling you the version from Harris. And after 1 year, the second man is again crossing over the Cleasham on the mountain pass, and again he sees the door is open and the disco lights are coming out of the hill. And he goes in, and there's his friend still dancing, with a barrel of whiskey still on his shoulder. Just one more reel, just one more reel. And he pulls his friend by the arm and drags him back out into the normal world again. I press deeper into that landscape, and I'm asking myself, what do stories like this tell us that might be relevant to our times? And the place is full of stories. On the other side from Cleasham is the mountain Uskaval, which means water mountain or ox mountain. And it was on Uskaval that Noah's Ark floundered, because you see there were 3 great floods, according to the storytellers. The first great flood was the primordial flood of creation. The second great flood was Noah's flood. And the ark ran aground on Uskaval. Some of the animals got out. That explains how come we've got the red deer and the blue mountain here. And then Noah managed to refloat the ark on the high tide, so it carried on to Mount Ararat in the Holy Land, and that's how come they've got camels and lions and such like. And you're walking and walking through bogs, mountain passes, and these stories start to come alive in your mind. You realize that you are walking through a landscape. The wild landscape is peopled through with stories. And I'm making for a destination. I'd been told about Bridget's Shieling, a place where nobody goes. Bridget, the Celtic goddess come Christian saint. I'd like to read you a little bit to give you a feel for what it's like. How am I doing for time, Christabel?
10 minutes.
Sorry?
10 minutes.
About another 10 minutes. Just read a passage here. Beyond, the land is corrugated in long ridges. It forms a row of dipping bays along the shores of Loch Nerval. I pick a listless way across these sandy, stony beaches. The wind is gaining force again, rain clouds closing in. Dusk begins to settle. I want to get the tent up while it's still dry. I'm getting cold and weary. Come to think of it, I've not had a drink since Loch Ascur. I kneel down, cup hands to sup, and feel the run of water through my fingers. Its cold trickle down the backs of my wrists. Such a very basic thing to do. Such animal survival. And I count along Loch Ervil's bays to number 5, and then I cut up directly north into the moor. North towards the Rua Lethan. These little hillocks are such special places. They're stupas of the moor. The dung of cattle, seeking breeze, has built a deep fertility, and in high summer they're spangled through with sky blue flecks of speedwell, wild pansy or heartsease, and tiny eyebright with its flares of seashell white that burst from out of a golden yellow nucleus. And I'm scanning everywhere for the ruins, walking sunrise. Into the 21st century, a very old Catholic priest from one of the Southern Isles said to me quietly about Bridget, about Bridget, about the feminine divine. I don't have to go to a church as a Hebridean. I only have to go down to the shore, pick up a piece of seaweed, listening to the birds and talking to the sea. Bridget was at the heart of our religion. The tide coming in was bringing her gifts. She is in charge of all of that. We don't worship her. We wouldn't use the words to worship for Bridget, but we go pretty near it. And from here the land slopes gently down towards the misted hills of Ishkin. I clamber down the cliff towards the ruins and crouch beside the formless blocks of stone. These have lain here undisturbed for a very long time. Their once sharp edges are now rounded down to softness and mottled white and grey with lichen shrouds. I'm gazing at the Linton stone, so long and flat and very thin. This would have carried the weight above the door. It rests reclining in the grass, retired amongst the other rocks, unharmed by any force of human hand. And God said unto Moses, if you use stones to build my altar, use only natural, uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with a tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. Once all but little children would have bowed their heads on crossing underneath. Visitors would have paused to call a blessing on the house. I likewise bow my head, ask blessing, step inside the ring and kneel. Such sweetness, tenderness, holy, holy, holy. And then I notice a fresh sprung fern is pressing through a cliff against the lintel. Not bracken, but a flush of verdure such as I have not seen elsewhere in all my walking. A line from a John Martin song comes willowing across my mind. You curl around me like a fern in the spring. And in George Bernard Shaw's Joan of Arc, the Inquisitor puts it to the lass that God's voice sounds only in her imagination. Of course, she answers, that is how the messages of God come to us. The rain is coming on. I pull my hood in tight. I'm with you always, says the voice in my imagination. Don't use hard tools on rocks that need their time to smooth. Never forget, I curl around you like a fern in the spring. And it's just me, Alastair, alone out here at St. Bridget's Shieling as the night sets in, absorbed in skeins of textured mist that drift in folds across the far southeast. Only the rain, a rising tide that whelms the quilted lichens. I watch it trickle down in dribs and drabs through tiny written runnels, kneeling at this lintel in this ring of unhewn stones. I need to draw to a conclusion. I can only say, friends, that my experience as that walk deepened and deepened with an entry into an imagination that was both of me and of beyond me. Nora Bateson, the daughter of Gregory Bateson, who wrote Steps to an Ecology of Mind, said to me when I asked what her father was trying to achieve, the great anthropologist and geneticist, great English scholar, Gregory Bateson, she said, I think he was trying to say we don't know what it is that we are inside of. I put it to you that in the travails of your activism, whatever that activism might be, it might be stuff like, big stuff like land reform that I've been involved in my life, just now from the Isle of Egg, celebrating 20 years of the community land buyout from their landowner. It might be something like that that really hits the headlines. Or more likely, your activism may be something very much less visible, the care of children or an elderly relative, the battling with an illness you might have, or a tragedy you might be carrying, maybe even something you've done that you carry heavily on your soul. All of these things are activism. But always remember, we may not know what it is that we are inside of. On the field of truth, on the battlefield of life, what came to pass, Sanjaya? Who amongst us in this room can know the fullness of the Dharma, of the cosmic unfolding of reality, the magnitude of the Tao in which our lives are held, the love revealed upon the cross that absorbs all the violence of the world and cannot die because such is a love beyond the life and death of ordinary living and dying. Such is the depths of creative imagination that is creation itself, whose fullness is found not in the vicissitudes of space and time, but in the fullness of eternity. My friends, I put it to you that to engage in our activism is, as St. John of the Cross put it, to die into the arms of love. And when you die, which is to say, let go, relax, enjoy, be inspired. What were all those words we had at the beginning? When you deeply let go, when you die to that small self, and you open to the dharmic self, you realize in the Advaya or Advaya principle that Atman is Brahman. Your small self is universal self. I am me and you, but we are all together. We are all deeply parts of one another, members one of another, as St. Paul put it on one of his good days. Branches on the vine of life, the tree of life. When you realize that, that's where the joy comes from. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I cast my lot with those, with you here in this room, with the human souls who will make a difference where a difference can be made, and that is the only difference that matters. The difference you can make. I cast my lot, age after age, with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. Reconstitute the world. Thank you, folks. Thank you. Forgive me, I wasn't talking about specifics of this activist campaign or that activist campaign. I just got the feeling sitting here watching you, I just felt that wasn't necessary. I got the feeling you probably know quite a lot about specifics. I just wanted to take that into the Dharma and hope you got a feel for that. So. Where's my mics?
There's like 10 minutes for questions, so if anyone has any.
Could we have a mic over here, please? Thanks.
Can you just repeat that quote about the imagination and God?
Which one? No.
Have it off the top of your head. When you were in the chapel and...
the Joan of Arc.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a play called Joan of Arc, written by George Bernard Shaw.
That's the one.
Okay, and in the play, Bernard Shaw, of course, a man who understood the imagination because he was an artist. That's what artists do, and I use the word artist in the very broad sense to mean musicians, visual artists, poets, the whole shebang that many of you here will understand. And he put into Joan's mouth, he created a situation where she's being questioned by her inquisitor. And she's claiming to be inspired in what she's doing by divine voices that she hears. And her inquisitor says, "How do you know it's the voice of God that you're hearing? How do you know it's not just your imagination?" And she replies, as George Bernard Shaw portrays her, "God speaks to me through my imagination." I put it to you that Brahman, that the Buddha nature, the goddess, Bridger, however you feel comfortable to describe the divine, will speak to you through your imagination. And that is what creative process is about. That's why when we get into creative process, it is such a wrestling. You know, it took me 7 years to wrestle that book into its final form. It is such a wrestling, but it is also such a joy. It is also so full of meaning, because it's the flow of the divine, it's the flow of the Spirit that's coming through you. Does that speak to what you are seeking?
A lot, yeah. Very much.
Do you want to say how? Do you want to share in what way it speaks to you?
Not particularly, no.
Okay, thanks. That's fine. I just wanted to give you the opportunity, so it's not just me doing the talking. Thank you. Anybody else like to raise something? Yes, the mic over here, please.
Thank you very much for the beautiful talk.
And remember to speak loud enough so people can hear you far at the other end of the room. That's perfect for me. But
I wanted to ask, what acts or steps have you found helpful for aligning to your small self and aligning with what matters, be that nature, ecology, the universe? Yeah, what have you found helpful for getting closer to that?
yeah. There's a very beautiful American spiritual teacher of the old hippie era called Ram Dass, or Richard Alpert. If you Google "Be Here Now," you'll get Ram Dass's podcasts, and they're very beautiful things. I once had a privilege of meeting him. And he said something I heard him say when I was beginning to think about these things. He's an old man now, well into his 80s. He said, "If in doubt what to do with your life, feed the hungry." So at times in my life when I felt frustrated, I felt bored, I felt I wasn't going anywhere, I've just stood back a little bit and looked at myself and said, am I feeding the hungry? And that can be very literal. It's very interesting tonight, you know, it's revolving around a meal, which is a powerful way of bringing community together. We do the same in Glasgow, where I'm involved in a project addressing poverty, the Galgale Trust in Govan, where I live. We put on meals all the time. We feed the hungry. But it's also metaphorical. If you're an artist, if you're an intellectual, if you're working in a factory, look on your life as feeding the hungry. And that discipline for me of calling myself back like a mantra, you know, I'm losing the plot a bit, I'm drifting. Okay, Alastair, are you feeding the hungry? What would it mean now to feed the hungry? That's probably been the single most important thing for me.
Thank you.
Yes, over here, please.
I'm not sure I quite have a question, but I'm very interested in the stories of the land. You're very lucky to come from this place, and you've heard various versions of the stories of the land. And I haven't read your book, but how does that work for you, and what's that brought into your life? Obviously, you have your faith. But I'm very interested in the narrative and how you bring that ancient narrative to the present. Because everyone here is like, what do we do today? No one's listening to old-fashioned stories.
No. You know, I think, as you say, nobody's listening to old stories, but is it making them happy? And is it giving them a happiness that's going to be sustained? Or is it only going to last while they're caught up in all the whirl of youth and celebrity and career? And they're going to reach a time in their life when they become bored and boring people. Because the juice of life has dried up. And I can only say that my experience, I mean, you talked about having faith. I mean, I rejected the religion I was raised in on the island. But mainly through Hinduism, reading the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, I gradually made a journey back to that. But you know, at a different orbit in the spiral, if you like. And what I found is that the deeper I get into the island and its stories and its meaning, the more that is revealed to me. And a lot of my work, you know, in the 1990s, I was doing major work on land reform, also with the Harris super quarry. We managed to stop a mountain in a national scenic area being destroyed. And I started getting people in the cities saying to me, well, Alastair, it's all right for you because you grew up on a wee Scottish island and you're doing your work in places like Harris and Egg, but what about us who are the intergenerational product of people who got pushed off the land and end up here? You know, what about you in London? Read Thomas Hardy's Tess or his other books, and you'll see, especially in Tess, you'll see that process by which just in Wessex, which is, I don't know, maybe less than 100 miles from here, in Hardy's time, a century or so ago, people were getting pushed off the land and driven into poverty in the cities and losing that connection. So, you know, 13 years ago, my wife and I, we moved to live in Govan. If you know the Rabsy Nesbitt show on the BBC, that's Govan for you. Some of the people in Rabsy Nesbitt, some of the extras, are people involved in our project. They're my friends. They're real people. And what we're about in the Gal Gael Trust in Govan is we're trying to reconstitute that sense of meaning. We're trying to reclaim our sense of meaning. Nick Spencer, who is somebody I've met by the internet and has just come along to meet face to face for the first time tonight, you were telling me that William Blake is buried
just around the corner.
Just a couple of 100 yards from here. Wow! You know, 200 yards or so from here, you have got the greatest prophet of the imagination in early modern English literature. Wow. But do people know that? Maybe they do, I don't know. I don't know this area. What we found in our part of Glasgow is that people didn't know their own history. And so you dig from where you stand. You start off putting on a meal to get people together. And then you have talks and discussions like this. You get people to share from their experience. And then you start feeling more and more deeply into the community and say, what is found here? What is found here? What can make us indigenous to this place? And note the name of our organisation in Glasgow, the Gal Gael. Because we started off with a motorway protest in the 1990s, a bit like you had at Twyford down and what have you down here. In fact, a number of our people cut their teeth in the Newbury bypass and things like that, and then came back up to Scotland with what they'd learned from that re-indigenisation. And we thought, you know, we have to again become indigenous to our place. But let's be very careful how we do this, because we're not the BNP. We're not the National Front. This is not about a re-indigenisation that is xenophobic. And we found that in the 9th century, there had been so much Norse interfusion into Celtic Scotland that the people in these areas where blood mixed were called the Gal Gael, because the Gal means the stranger, as in place names like Galloway and Galway. The Gael, the Gaelic-speaking people, are the heartland people. And so we developed this way of thinking that we are all Gal Gael now. There's a little bit of the stranger and a little bit of the heartland people in all of us. I grew up in Lewis with a Scottish father. I was actually born in Doncaster of an English mother. I too am Gal Gael, okay? We're all Gal Gael. Now, when you take that attitude, when you have an inclusive sense of identity and belonging, whether in your local community or your nation, then you can have a community or a nation to be proud of, because it's predicated on the principles of love. It's predicated, as I put it in one of my own poems, a person belongs inasmuch as they are willing to cherish and be cherished by this place and its peoples plural. Does that speak to you? Thank you. Yep.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. And what I'm sort of feeling into what it is that you were saying, a lot of what you were talking about is about surrendering to love or dying to love.
Yeah, yielding, and you submit to rape, but a lover surrenders.
Yeah.
Big difference. To submit is to go under, to lose yourself. To surrender is to yield over. Huge difference. Yeah, in fact, I say to my Islamic friends sometimes that, if when you're translating from the Arabic into the English, rather than talking about submitting to Allah, beautiful name, Allah, it's mantric, a more meaningful translation might be to say surrender to Allah in that way that you do into a lover's arms. Yeah.
So, considering that where you're going, your journey now, your way will be to speak
to the military,
to the military, to the senior level,
yeah,
or different generation, to then comparing to who it is that your audience is now.
Yeah.
Obviously, times are difficult or tough, and everything's doom and gloom potentially on the horizon. Surrendering to that Dharmic way, anyways, are you instilled with hope with the people that you see here, for example, and the things that you deliver, more so than a fear or something like that?
Well, I would say, first of all, I distinguish between optimism and hope. Okay. I'm not very optimistic for the state of the world. Especially one of my books is about climate change, and I've got enough scientific training to see what's coming on. But never let go of hope. Hope is a spiritual quality. Hope is the quality of come what may in the come to pass. You say, well, this is how the Dharma is unfolding just now. Let us surrender unto the Dharma. And try not to get too tripped up in the shadow of our own karma. That's what you do. And I'll tell you, on Friday morning when I'm speaking to the military, I'll be traveling through there tomorrow afternoon, on Friday morning, I will be talking to them in much the same mode as I'm talking to you just now. I will be taking the agenda that I am given to talk about non-violence and using that to draw out these same spiritual principles. My last slide, because I sent it through to them this morning, my last slide is of trenches in the First World War, long winding trenches, all these soldiers with their guns poking out at different positions. And I say to them, friends, consider this. We are all living our lives along a long front. I have put the case to you today for non-violence, for pacifism. You have your reasons for having chosen the vocation of a soldier. But none of us have got a God's eye view. Look at those soldiers in the trench. Each one of us can only see through the little window of our life. And I leave it with you that as we wrestle on the battlefield of life, on the field of Dharma, on the battlefield of life, what came to pass, Sanjaya, as we run with that chariot of life beside the blind King Tony Blair, Dhritarashtra, or whoever led us into these wars. What matters less is the rightness and wrongness of what you are doing or what I am doing, because my way is not perfect either. What matters is that we are constantly heeding that higher call of the cosmic piper. The Highland soldier dying on the battlefield, and his dying words, the pipes, the pipes. And the piper will lead you to reason. Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, climb it. That Stairway to Heaven, it's such a trip out. The Spiritual Activism book, Matt and I, the very last chapter, were playing a medley on Stairway to Heaven, woven through the prose. Robert Plant, is that his name? I think so. Yeah, he was studying Celtic magic at the time he wrote that, and it's full of goddess illusion. The May Queen in the hedgerow. Who is that? That's Bridger. That's the goddess, Celtic goddess. Total trip out. You see? And if you're artists, you know, your task is to waken people up. Your task as artists, and we are all artists in this sense, is to waken each other up to consciousness. And we can only waken each other up to consciousness if we are inviting others to help wake us up to consciousness. We don't do it on our own. You don't do the work of love on your own. You don't do it. It's not about staring at your own navel. You do it in community with others. What did the Buddha do? He left the royal palace and he went out and he sat underneath a tree. He connected with soil. He connected with place. And he received enlightenment. He connected with soul. He connected with the God space, the Buddha nature, whatever you want to call that. What did he do then? He went off to establish the Noble Sangha. And I suspect that is a bell telling us that the Noble Sangha is ready to serve up a delicious banquet. Thank you very much.